A single speck of dust. That's all it took for billionaire Arthur Blackwood to deny his maid her final paycheck. In the heart of his sterile, multi-million-dollar penthouse, a place where perfection wasn't just expected, but demanded, this one microscopic failure was a cardinal sin. He saw it as a breach of contract, a sign of disrespect. But the maid, a quiet nursing student named Eleanor Vance, refused to leave. She stood her ground, not just for the $800 she was owed, but for a reason that would shatter the very foundation of his meticulously controlled world. Because in her hands, she held a secret, a truth hidden for over 30 years that would unravel his past, redefine his future, and change his life forever. Arthur Blackwood's world was one of precise angles and polished surfaces. From the gleaming chrome legs of his Mies van der Rohe chairs to the surgically aligned books on his shelves, everything in his Manhattan penthouse overlooking Central Park existed in a state of flawless order. This order was a reflection of his mind, a fortress built of disciplined routine, and an unforgiving intolerance for imperfection. It was this ethos that had allowed him to transform a modest inheritance into a global logistics empire worth billions. It was also what made him an impossible man to work for. On this particular Tuesday afternoon, the object of his exacting scrutiny was Eleanor Vance. For the past 6 months, Eleanor had been the invisible hand in his home. Hired through a premium agency, her job was to clean 3 times a week, leaving no trace of her presence, save for the pristine environment she left behind. She was good. In fact, she was the best he'd had. Quiet, efficient, and possessing an almost supernatural ability to understand his unspoken rules. But her tenure was over. She was starting her final year of nursing school and needed to focus on her clinical rotations. Today was her last day. She stood before his monolithic mahogany desk, her hands clasped respectfully in front of her. She was a stark contrast to the room's cold luxury. Her simple blue scrubs were worn but clean, her expression calm but weary. "The final invoice, Mr. Blackwood," she said, her voice soft but clear. She slid a single neatly folded paper across the vast expanse of polished wood. Arthur didn't look at it. He didn't need to. He knew the amount, $800 for 2 weeks of work. Instead, his gaze, sharp and grey, like splintered ice, was fixed on a point far across the room. He slowly rose, a tall, imposing figure in a tailored suit, and walked towards the grand window. The late afternoon sun cast a long, sharp shadow behind him. He stopped beside a marble pedestal that held a single priceless ladro sculpture. He ran a white-gloved finger. He often wore them in the house to avoid leaving prints along the sculpture's base. He held his finger up to the light. On the very tip was a single, almost invisible speck of dust. "Tell me, Miss Vance," he began, his voice dangerously low. "What was the primary condition of your employment?" Eleanor's brow furrowed slightly. "To maintain the residence to your specified standards of cleanliness and order, sir?" "Precisely. My standards. Not almost my standards. Not good enough. The contract you signed stipulated perfection. It is a legally binding document." He turned to face her, his expression as hard and unyielding as the marble he had just touched. "This," he said, gesturing with the soiled fingertip, "is not perfection." Eleanor blinked a flicker of disbelief in her dark, intelligent eyes. "Mr. Blackwood, I assure you I cleaned that pedestal not 2 hours ago. The air filtration system itself." "Are you making an excuse?" He cut in, his voice slicing through her explanation. "Are you suggesting that the failure lies with my multi-million-dollar environmental control system and not your own oversight?" Silence descended upon the room, thick and suffocating. Eleanor knew this was not about the dust. It was about power. It was a test she had seen him administer to C-suite executives and intimidated lawyers. She had just never imagined he would wield it against her over $800. "No, sir," she said, her chin held high. "I am not." "Good." He walked back to his desk, picked up her invoice, and tore it neatly in half, then in quarters. He dropped the small white squares into a leather-bound wastebasket. "As you have failed to meet the conditions of our agreement on your final day, your final payment is forfeited. It is a matter of principle. The agency has been informed of this breach. You may see yourself out." He sat down and turned his attention to his computer, a clear dismissal. The transaction in his mind was complete. But Eleanor didn't move. The initial shock gave way to a slow-burning resolve. It wasn't just the money, though. She desperately needed it for her textbooks. It was the sheer, callous injustice of it. It was the principle. Her principle. "Mr. Blackwood," she said, her voice no longer soft but firm, resonant. He ignored her, the rhythmic tapping of his keyboard, the only sound. "Mr. Blackwood," she repeated louder this time. He stopped typing, his head slowly rising. His eyes narrowed. "I believe our business is concluded. If you do not leave now, I will have my security escort you from the premises." "You can call them," Eleanor said, taking a small step forward. "But I think you'll want to hear what I have to say first. Because this isn't about a speck of dust, is it? It's about what's in your late wife's sealed-off bedroom." The name of his wife, Lillian, hung in the air like a ghost. Arthur's face, a mask of cold control, instantly fractured. A vein throbbed at his temple. That wing of the penthouse had been locked and untouched since the day she died 5 years ago. No one was ever to enter. "You have 1 minute to explain that outrageous statement," he hissed, his voice trembling with a rage he hadn't felt in years. "And then you are leaving this building with or without your payment." Eleanor met his furious gaze without flinching. "I don't want your money anymore, Mr. Blackwood," she said, her voice dropping to an intense, almost sorrowful whisper. "What I have to give you is far more valuable. It's a story. Lillian's story. And it starts with a little girl. She called her Starlight." Arthur Blackwood froze, his hand hovering over the intercom button. Starlight. It was a word he hadn't heard in 5 years. A nonsense word Lillian would sometimes whisper in her sleep, a word he had always dismissed as a fragment of a dream. How could this woman possibly know that word? In that moment, the sterile order of his world began to tilt on its axis. To understand how Eleanor Vance found herself in that locked room, one had to understand her nature. She was an observer, a trait honed by a childhood spent shuffling between foster homes and sharpened by her nursing training. She saw the details others missed, the slight tremor in a patient's hand, the way a family member's smile didn't quite reach their eyes, the subtle patterns of life that played out in the periphery. She had taken the job at Arthur Blackwood's penthouse out of necessity. The agency, Prestige Domestics, catered to the city's elite, and the pay was enough to cover her tuition and modest living expenses in a small Brooklyn apartment. The head of the agency, a stern but fair woman named Patricia Holloway, had warned her about Arthur. "He's our most difficult client," she'd said. "He's fired 7 maids in the last 2 years. He doesn't want a person. He wants a phantom who erases the evidence of living." Eleanor had taken it as a challenge. She learned his routines. The coffee machine cleaned by 6:00 a.m. The Wall Street Journal placed exactly parallel to the edge of the kitchen island. No chemical smells, only the faint scent of eucalyptus from the specific brand of organic cleaner he mandated. For months, she succeeded in being that phantom. She would arrive before he woke and often leave after he'd departed for his office downtown. They rarely spoke more than a few words, but in her silent movements through the vast museum-like apartment, she observed the man. She saw the deep lines of grief etched around his eyes when he thought no one was looking. She saw the way he would sometimes pause before a large, silver-framed portrait of a beautiful woman with kind, laughing eyes. Lillian. The portrait was the only object in the entire home that seemed to possess any warmth. And then there was the West Wing, an entire section of the penthouse, a master bedroom, a sitting room, and a study was kept locked. Her instructions were explicit: clean up to the dividing door in the hallway, and no further. A fine layer of dust coated the floor right at the threshold, a line of demarcation between the living and the preserved. Curiosity gnawed at her. It wasn't just a closed-off room. It was a shrine, a place where time had been ordered to stop. Her chance came 2 weeks before her last day. It was a Thursday. She had arrived to find a team of art installers carefully mounting a new, enormous abstract painting in the main foyer. The chaos was controlled, but it was chaos nonetheless. In the confusion with staff and security focused on the installation, the door to the West Wing was slightly ajar, the deadbolt not fully thrown. Perhaps a security guard had checked it and failed to secure it properly. It was a breach of her duties, a risk to her job. But a force she couldn't name pulled her forward. She slipped her cleaning cart behind a large potted fig to hide her absence from the hallway cameras and pushed the heavy oak door open. The air inside was stale, thick with the scent of dried roses, and something else, something like old paper and faded perfume. It wasn't a room. It was a time capsule. A sheer nightgown was draped over a chair as if its owner had just stepped out. A half-finished book of poetry lay face down on the bedside table, its page marked with a dried lavender stem. Everything was exactly as Lillian Blackwood had left it. Eleanor felt like an intruder, a profaner of sacred ground. She was about to back out when her eyes fell on a writing desk in the corner. Unlike Arthur's sterile mahogany monolith, this one was a delicate antique secretary desk. Its surface was cluttered with personal effects: a silver hairbrush, a small porcelain music box, and a collection of leather-bound journals. It was the journals that called to her. One was open its pages, filled with an elegant, flowing script. Eleanor knew she shouldn't. It was the ultimate invasion of privacy. But the loneliness of the room, the palpable sense of a life interrupted, was overwhelming. She told herself she would just read a single page. She picked up the open journal. The date at the top of the page was from 15 years ago. October 12th. Arthur bought me the Matisse lithograph today. He said it matched the color of my eyes. He is a good man, a fiercely protective man. He has built a fortress around me, around us. But he doesn't know that my heart lives outside these walls. It lives in a world I can only imagine. Tonight I dreamt of her again. She had my curls and her father's smile. I called to her my starlight, but the wind snatched my voice away. 20 years. Is it possible for a heart to ache for 20 years without shattering completely? Eleanor's own heart clenched. Starlight. It was a mother's secret name for a lost child. She carefully turned back a few pages, then a few more. The story began to unfold, a tale of love and loss that predated Arthur Blackwood entirely. Lillian Hayes, at 17, had fallen in love with a young musician named David. It was a whirlwind, youthful romance that resulted in a pregnancy. Her conservative, image-obsessed parents were horrified. They sent her away to a private maternity home, forced her to sign adoption papers, and erased the mistake from their family history. The baby, a girl named Sarah, was taken from her arms hours after birth. Lillian never saw her again. Eleanor sank into the dusty armchair, her breath catching in her throat. She read for what felt like an eternity, the art installers in the foyer, a distant memory. She read about Lillian's lifelong secret search for her daughter. She had hired private investigators who hit dead ends. The adoption was sealed, the records buried under layers of legal concrete. She wrote letters to the adoption agency that went unanswered. She carried the grief like a chronic illness, a pain she could never share with Arthur, for he was a man who craved perfection, and her past in her mind was a permanent, shameful flaw. As Eleanor read, a strange sense of recognition began to dawn. Lillian's maiden name was Hayes. The maternity home was St. Jude's Home for Mothers, located just outside Philadelphia. The date of birth was May 3rd. Eleanor's blood ran cold. She fumbled in her worn backpack for her wallet. With trembling fingers, she pulled out a folded, laminated copy of her original birth certificate, a document she had obtained after years of petitioning the state once she turned 18, a vital link to a past she'd never known. The information stared back at her, stark and undeniable. Name, baby girl, Sarah Hayes. Date of birth, May 3rd, 1995. Place of birth, St. Jude's Home for Mothers. PA mother's name, Lillian Hayes. Eleanor felt the air leave her lungs. The room began to spin. She was Sarah. She was the baby in the journal. The woman who had lived in this room, the laughing woman in the silver frame, the wife of the cold, tyrannical man in the other room, was her mother. She was Lillian's starlight. This secret, this earth-shattering truth changed everything. It reframed her 6 months of silent service. It reframed the cold, distant billionaire who was not, as she now realized, a stranger, but her stepfather. And it reframed the confrontation that was to come. She closed the journal and placed it back on the desk, her movements precise and deliberate. She now had a purpose that went far beyond an $800 paycheck. She was no longer just the maid. She was a daughter there to claim the story that had been stolen from her. The word starlight struck Arthur Blackwood with the force of a physical blow. His mind, a meticulously organized filing system, scrambled for context. It was a private, nonsensical word he'd overheard in the dead of night. Lillian, her face peaceful in sleep, would sometimes murmur it. He had once asked her about it, and she had waved it off with a sad smile, saying only, "It's just a silly old dream." For this woman, this maid, to know that word was impossible. It was a violation, a crack in the foundation of his memory. "Where did you hear that name?" he demanded, his voice a low growl. He strode around the desk until he was standing directly in front of Eleanor, using his height to intimidate her. It had always worked before. It was not working now. Eleanor stood her ground, her gaze unwavering. "I didn't hear it," she said, her voice filled with a quiet, profound sadness. "I read it, in your wife's journal." The admission sent a shockwave of rage through Arthur. "You entered her rooms," he whispered, the accusation laced with venom. "You desecrated her memory. You defiled the one place I learned her memory." Eleanor corrected him, her tone firm but not disrespectful. "A memory you never even knew she had. You built her a beautiful cage, Mr. Blackwood. You filled it with art and jewels. But you never saw the part of her that was trapped outside, grieving for a child she was forced to give away." Arthur recoiled as if she had slapped him. "Lies. You are a thief and a liar. A desperate little girl trying to extort money from a grieving husband." He reached for the phone on his desk. "I am calling the police. You will be charged with breaking and entering with theft." "Theft of what?" Eleanor challenged him. "A story, a truth. Go ahead and call them. Ask them to dust the journal for fingerprints. Mine will be there from 2 weeks ago. but so will hers from every day for 30 years. She took a deep breath, her own emotions churning beneath her calm exterior. This was the moment, the point of no return. Her name was Lillian Hayes. Eleanor began her voice, taking on the rhythm of a eulogy. When she was 17, she fell in love with a musician. She got pregnant. Her parents, ashamed of the scandal, sent her to St. Jude's Home for Mothers outside Philadelphia. On May 3rd, 1995, she gave birth to a daughter. They named me Sarah. They took me from her arms 3 hours later. She never saw me again. She spent the rest of her life looking for me, writing to me in journals she knew I would never read. She called me her starlight. Every detail was a hammer blow against the walls of Arthur's denial. He knew Lillian's maiden name was Hayes. He knew she had grown up near Philadelphia. The pieces were slotting together into a picture he refused to see. "This is an elaborate fiction," he sneered, though a sliver of doubt had begun to pierce his anger. "Something you concocted after reading a grieving woman's private thoughts. You have no proof." "Don't I?" Eleanor reached into the simple canvas tote bag she used for her school books. She pulled out a worn, slightly crumpled manila folder. From it, she produced a plastic-sleeved document. It was her copy of the birth certificate. She laid it on the desk between them. Arthur stared at it. The official state seal, the typed, impersonal letters. Lillian Hayes. The name was there in black and white, linked to a child. His Lillian. His carefully constructed world began to crumble. His marriage to Lillian had been the one perfect thing in his life. She was his anchor, his island of grace and beauty in a brutal corporate world. He had seen her as a delicate, flawless creature whom he had sheltered and protected. The idea that she had carried a secret of this magnitude, a wound this deep for all the years they were together, was inconceivable. It meant he hadn't known her at all. The father... Arthur managed to choke out the question, tasting like ash. This musician... His name was David. David Miller, Eleanor said softly. According to the journals, he tried to fight for her for me. But her parents threatened him, drove him away. Lillian never knew what happened to him. The name Miller resonated with an ugly clang in Arthur's mind. Daniel Miller was the name of his chief legal counsel, a brilliant, ruthless lawyer who had been with his firm for over a decade. He had a younger brother who had died tragically in his 20s, a musician named David. The coincidence was too great, too cruel. Arthur stumbled back and sank into his chair, the strength draining from his limbs. He stared at Eleanor, truly seeing her for the first time. He saw the shape of her eyes, the gentle curve of her jawline. It was faint, a mere echo, but it was there. It was Lillian. He looked at the torn pieces of the $800 invoice in his wastebasket, then back at the young woman standing before him. The immense, staggering foolishness of his own actions crashed down on him. He had been arguing about a speck of dust, while the most important truth of his life stood silently in the room. "Why?" he whispered, his voice hoarse. "Why tell me now? Why like this? Because you were going to dismiss me over nothing," Eleanor replied, a single tear finally tracing a path down her cheek. "You were going to throw me away, just like my grandparents threw my mother away, just like the world threw me away. I wasn't just fighting for $800, Mr. Blackwood. I was fighting for my mother's story. I was fighting for the right to be seen." Her words stripped away the last of his defenses. The billionaire, the titan of industry, the master of an ordered universe, was gone. In his place was just a man hollowed out by a truth he had never been equipped to handle. He covered his face with his hands, a dry, racking sob escaping his chest. The fortress had been breached. The walls were coming down. The silence that followed Arthur's breakdown was profound. It was heavier than any argument, filled with the weight of unspoken history and the ghosts of 30 years. Eleanor remained standing, allowing him the space to process the cataclysm she had unleashed. She felt no triumph, only a deep, shared sorrow. She was grieving for the mother she never knew, and he was grieving for the wife he thought he did. Finally, Arthur lowered his hands. His face was pale, his eyes red-rimmed and stripped of their usual arrogance. He looked older, fragile. "Daniel," he said, his voice barely a whisper. "Daniel Miller, my lawyer." "You know him?" Eleanor asked, though the answer seemed terrifyingly clear. "He's worked for me for 12 years. He's my right hand. His younger brother, David. He was a musician. Died in a car accident over 20 years ago." Arthur's eyes unfocused as he connected the dots, a spiderweb of tragedy, spanning decades and connecting everyone in the room. "Daniel never talks about him. Said the loss was too great. He just keeps a small, faded picture of him on his desk." A picture of her father. The thought sent a jolt through Eleanor. A man she had never known, whose blood ran in her veins, had been a spectral presence in this very ecosystem for years. The intercom on Arthur's desk buzzed a shrill, unwelcome intrusion. His assistant's voice, tinny and deficient, came through. "Mr. Blackwood, Mr. Miller is here for your 4:30 p.m. signing. Shall I send him in?" Arthur and Eleanor locked eyes. The past was not just in the room. It was waiting in the lobby. The brother of the man Lillian had loved, the uncle of the woman standing before him, was mere feet away. "Send him in," Arthur said, his voice regaining a sliver of its old authority. It was the command of a man marching toward his own execution. Daniel Miller was the opposite of his late brother, as Arthur had always understood it. Where David had been a free-spirited artist, Daniel was a creature of law and logic, dressed in a somber, perfectly tailored suit that mirrored Arthur's own. He was sharp, perceptive, and loyal. He entered the office with a leather folio under his arm, his expression professional. "Arthur," he began, then stopped short, his gaze falling on Eleanor. He registered her simple scrubs, her tear-streaked face, and the palpable tension in the room. His lawyer's mind immediately sensed a problem. "I can come back if this is a bad time." "No, Daniel. Stay," Arthur commanded, his voice strained. "We have something. We need to discuss something far more important than contracts." Arthur gestured toward Eleanor. "This is Eleanor Vance. She has been working here for the past 6 months." Daniel gave Eleanor a polite, dismissive nod, assuming she was a domestic employee in some kind of trouble. "A pleasure. Ms. Vance," Arthur continued, his eyes fixed on Daniel, "has just shared some information with me. Information about my late wife, Lillian." Daniel's posture stiffened. He was fiercely protective of Arthur, especially regarding Lillian's memory. If there is some kind of claim being made against the estate— "It's not a claim, Daniel," Arthur interrupted, his voice breaking. "It's a history." He took a deep breath. "She knew your brother, David." The name hit Daniel like a physical shock. His professional mask vanished, replaced by a look of raw, unguarded pain. He had not heard anyone in his professional life speak that name in years. "What about my brother?" he asked, his voice low and dangerous. Eleanor knew this was her story to tell. Arthur had opened the door. She had to walk through it. "My mother's name was Lillian Hayes." She began, her voice steady despite her racing heart. "In 1994, she and your brother were in love. I am their daughter." Daniel stared at her, his face a maelstrom of confusion, disbelief, and dawning horror. He looked from Eleanor to Arthur, searching for the punchline to a sick joke. "That's impossible," Daniel stammered. David never mentioned a child. "He didn't know," Eleanor explained gently. "Lillian's parents sent her away. They told your brother she had ended the pregnancy and wanted nothing to do with him. They threatened his family. It's all in her journals. He was led to believe it was over, that he had been rejected." Daniel stumbled back, gripping the edge of a chair for support. His mind was racing, replaying fragments of conversations, the deep depression his brother had fallen into. That final year, a darkness the family had attributed to a broken heart over some high school fling. It hadn't been a fling. It had been a family. A stolen family. "The lies they told," Daniel whispered, his voice thick with a 30-year-old rage. "My parents, her parents, they ruined him. He was never the same after she disappeared from his life. He drove too fast, he took risks. He was trying to outrun a ghost." Suddenly, his lawyer's eyes narrowed on Eleanor again, but this time with a dawning, heartbreaking recognition. "Your eyes," he said, his voice cracking. "You have his eyes." He sank into the chair, the leather folio slipping from his grasp and spilling papers onto the floor. The stoic, unflappable Daniel Miller, the legal shark of Blackwood Industries, was weeping. He was weeping for the brother he had lost, and for the niece he had never known he had. The penthouse office, once a temple of commerce and control, had become a space of raw, agonizing reunion. Three strangers bound by a web of love lies and loss were left to sift through the wreckage of a past that had just violently erupted into their present. The torn invoice for $800 lay forgotten in the wastebasket, a pathetic monument to a conflict that had paled into utter insignificance. The next hour passed in a blur of fragmented revelations and shared grief. Daniel Miller, the pragmatic lawyer, was consumed by the emotional what-ifs. He spoke of his brother's talent, his kindness, the songs he wrote for a girl named Lily, whose parents had stolen her away. Arthur, for his part, was mostly silent, a spectator, at the excavation of his own life. His marriage, which he had curated like a perfect work of art, was being revealed as something far more complex and tragic. He had loved Lillian completely, but he now understood he had only loved the part of her she had allowed him to see. It was Eleanor who anchored them. Possessing a composure born of her nursing training, she answered their questions, recounting passages from the journals, filling in the blanks of their respective histories. She was the living bridge between two families who had been cruelly torn apart. "There's more," Eleanor finally said, her voice bringing the two men back from their sorrowful reveries. "In the last journal written in the weeks before she passed away, she wrote about you, Mr. Blackwood, and she left something." A new kind of tension filled the room. Arthur looked up, his expression apprehensive. He had been so focused on Lillian's hidden past that he hadn't considered her final thoughts, her last messages from the precipice of her life. Guided by Eleanor, the three of them made their way to the West Wing. For the first time in 5 years, Arthur Blackwood unlocked the door to his wife's suite, not as a gatekeeper to a shrine, but as a seeker of truth. The room was just as Eleanor had described it, a space frozen in time, heavy with memory. The scent of Lillian's perfume still lingered in the air, a fragrant ghost. While Daniel stood in the doorway, hesitant to intrude, Arthur walked directly to the antique secretary desk. He saw the journals, a neat row of leather-bound secrets. His hands trembled as he reached for the final volume, the one with a dried rose pressed between its pages. Eleanor pointed to a section near the end, the page bookmarked with a silk ribbon. Arthur opened it and began to read Lillian's elegant script, aloud, his voice thick with emotion. "My dearest Arthur," it began. If you are reading this, it means my time has run short, and someone has finally shown you this my greatest secret and my deepest shame. I pray you can forgive me, for the truth I never had the courage to speak. I loved you. I want you to know with every fiber of my being that my love for you was real and true. You gave me a life of safety and beauty, and you healed so many parts of me that were broken. But a part of my heart has always belonged to a memory, to a little girl I held for only a few hours. My starlight. I was so afraid to tell you, terrified that you, a man of such perfection, would see me as flawed as damaged goods. It was my own weakness, my own fear, not a lack of faith in you. For that I am eternally sorry. I have tried for years to find her. The search has been my secret burden. Enclosed in a compartment in this desk is everything I found. It is not much, but there is also a letter. Not for my daughter, but for you. Arthur paused, his breathing ragged. He looked at the desk and noticed for the first time a small, almost invisible seam in the woodwork. He pressed it, and a hidden drawer clicked open. Inside was a small, velvet-covered box. He lifted the lid. The contents were meager, the relics of a desperate search. There was a faded photograph of a baby, a hospital photo, grainy and impersonal. There was a copy of a birth certificate identical to the one Eleanor had. And there was a stack of letters returned and unopened addressed to the adoptive parents of Sarah Hayes via the adoption agency. Beneath them all was a single sealed envelope made of heavy cream-colored stationery. On the front, in Lillian's handwriting, was one word, Arthur. With unsteady hands, he broke the seal. Daniel and Eleanor watched in hushed silence. This was a message from beyond the grave, a final conversation between a husband and wife. He read the letter to himself, his eyes scanning the page, his expression shifting from sorrow to shock, and finally to a kind of pained understanding. After a long moment, he looked up his gaze, finding Eleanor. "She knew," he whispered. "Somehow she knew you were close." "What do you mean?" Eleanor asked. Arthur read from the letter. "In these last months, I hired a new investigator, a man named Robert Keller. He was better than the rest. He believed he was close. He had traced a path from the adoption to the New York foster care system. He said my daughter, our Sarah, was in the city. He said she was studying to be a nurse. He was supposed to give me her name the week after I was gone." A collective gasp filled the room. Lillian had been on the verge of finding her. The cruelty of fate was staggering. She had died mere days away from discovering the name of the daughter who years later would end up working in her very home. But there was one final paragraph. Arthur's voice dropped thick with a new, heavier emotion. "My dearest love." He read his voice, cracking. "This is my final request. If you find her, please do not let my parents' sin be yours. Do not turn her away. She is innocent in all of this. Inside this box you will find a separate account. I kept money I saved from my personal allowance over the years. It is all I have that is truly mine. I want her to have it, to build a life to be safe. Do this for me, Arthur. Protect my starlight. It is the only thing I will ever ask of you." He looked inside the box again and found a bank book he had overlooked. He opened it. The balance was just over $2 million. This was Lillian's final act. Not just a confession, but a provision. A fierce, maternal act of protection that reached across time and death. It was not a plea, but a plan. A legacy of love intended for the daughter she never met. For Arthur, this was the final devastating piece of the puzzle. The secret was not just about a lost child. It was about Lillian's enduring, active love for that child. The money was not just money. It was a testament, a responsibility, a sacred trust passed from his late wife to him, a duty he now had to fulfill. He looked at Eleanor no longer seeing a maid or an accuser, but the beneficiary of Lillian's last will and testament, the living embodiment of his wife's deepest love. The weight of Lillian's final request settled upon Arthur Blackwood, rearranging the very architecture of his soul. The man who lived by contract's clauses and the unforgiving logic of the balance sheet was now faced with a covenant of the heart, a debt that could not be quantified in monetary terms alone. He carefully placed Lillian's letter back on the desk, his movements full of a reverence that had been absent from his life for too long. He turned to face Eleanor, his eyes conveying a depth of emotion she had never thought him capable of. The ice had melted, revealing a landscape of profound regret. "I have failed her," Arthur said, his voice raw. "For 5 years I have lived in this monument to my own grief, believing I was honoring her memory. But I was just preserving a shell. Her real legacy, her living legacy, was out there struggling, and I was utterly blind to it." His gaze fell upon Eleanor's worn scrubs, her simple tote bag, the fatigue in her eyes that spoke of long hours studying and working. The image of him tearing up her $800 invoice flashed in his mind, an act of such staggering pettiness that it made him physically ill. "The money in this account," he said, gesturing to the bank book, "is yours. It is your birthright. Lillian made sure of it." Eleanor shook her head, overwhelmed. "Mr. Blackwood, I didn't come here for money. I came here for answers, to know who she was. And in doing so, you have shown me who I am," Arthur replied. "Or rather, who I have become. A man who would haggle over dust while standing on a mountain of gold." He walked out of Lillian's rooms, a man with a new and urgent purpose. Daniel and Eleanor followed him back into the cavernous office. Arthur went straight to his desk, but this time he didn't reach for a phone to call security. He opened a drawer and pulled out a checkbook, not from his personal account, but from the main Blackwood Industries executive account. His pen moved across the paper with a newfound fluidity. He wrote Eleanor's name, and in the amount box he wrote $80,000. He signed it with a firm, decisive hand. He slid the check across the desk to her. "This is not from Lillian's account. That is separate. That is your inheritance, and we will have Daniel arrange the transfer properly. This," he said, tapping the check, "is from me. It is a pathetic apology in the form of a down payment." Eleanor stared at the check, at the impossible number of zeros. "I can't accept this." "You will," Arthur stated, but his tone was not commanding. It was pleading. "Let's be transactional for a moment, as that is the only language I have truly mastered. Consider this back pay for the emotional labor you have performed today. Consider it a signing bonus for a new role. Consider it whatever you must, but take it. Pay off your student loans. Buy a car that runs. Get some sleep. Your mother wanted you to be safe. Allow me to begin fulfilling her wish." Before Eleanor could protest further, Daniel Miller stepped forward. He had been quietly observing his own grief, giving way to a sense of profound duty. "He is right, Eleanor," he said, using her first name for the first time. "Lillian wanted this. And David would have wanted this. He would have wanted his daughter to have every opportunity in the world." He looked at Arthur. "We have a lot to sort out. Legally. Personally." Arthur nodded. "Indeed. Daniel, I want you to begin the process of legally acknowledging Eleanor as Lillian's daughter. Whatever it takes, we will amend the estate." We will do it all by the book. But more than that, he paused, looking at Eleanor. I would like to ask you to stay. Eleanor was taken aback. Stay as in, keep cleaning. A sad, self-deprecating smile touched Arthur's lips for the first time. No, your cleaning days are over. Stay here in this home. The West Wing. It shouldn't be a museum. It should be your room. It's your mother's home. It is by right yours. The offer was staggering, a complete reversal of his world order. He was inviting what he perceived as chaos and imperfection into the heart of his sanctuary. I would like to get to know you, to hear more about your life, to hear more about Lillian through the words in her journals, if you would allow me. It was too much to process. A father she never knew. A mother she'd found only in writing. An uncle forged in grief. A stepfather who was a complete stranger. And now a fortune and a home she had only ever entered as a hired hand. She looked at the check in her hand. $80,000. Hours ago, she had been fighting for 1% of that amount. The money itself felt meaningless now, overshadowed by the immense emotional wealth she had discovered. It was proof of her mother's love, a tool to build the future her parents never got to see. With a deep, steadying breath, she picked up a pen from Arthur's desk. She turned the check over and endorsed it. Her signature clear and confident. It was her first act as Sarah Lillian Vance, a woman no longer defined by her struggles, but by the powerful, unseen love that had been searching for her all along. I don't know about staying, she said honestly, her voice soft but firm. That's a lot to think about. But I'd like to have dinner, the three of us. We can talk, we can start there. For the first time, a genuine smile reached Arthur Blackwood's eyes. Yes, he said. A start. That would be perfect. The weeks that followed were a delicate dance of discovery. The penthouse, once a cold gallery of wealth, slowly began to feel like a home. True to her word, Eleanor did not move in Not Yet. She needed her own space, her own life in Brooklyn, to process the seismic shifts that had occurred. But she became a regular visitor, no longer entering through the service door, but through the main entrance, announced not as the maid, but as Ms. Vance. The dinners became a weekly ritual. Arthur, Eleanor, and Daniel would gather around the massive dining table that had once been used for hostile board meetings and silent, lonely meals. Now it was a place of remembrance. Eleanor would bring one of Lillian's journals, and they would read passages aloud. They learned about Lillian's hopes for her daughter, her love for music passed down from David, her secret passion for gardening, which she could never indulge in a penthouse apartment. Arthur learned more about his wife in those weeks than he had in 15 years of marriage. He saw her not as a perfect object to be cherished, but as a resilient, complex woman who had borne an incredible burden with quiet grace. His grief transformed from a possessive sorrow into a deep, shared sense of loss with Eleanor and Daniel. He started changing. He began leaving his office at a reasonable hour. He took an interest in the charitable foundation Lillian had established, pouring his energy into the children's causes she had championed. He was building a new legacy on the ruins of his old one. Daniel, for his part, became the protective uncle he never knew he could be. He handled Eleanor's inheritance with meticulous care, setting up trusts and investments to ensure her future and her children's future would be secure. But more than that, he shared stories of David, his brother's goofy laugh, his terrible stage fright, despite his immense talent, his unwavering optimism. Through Daniel, Eleanor's father became more than a name in a journal. He became a person. One crisp autumn afternoon, Eleanor found Arthur in the West Wing. He hadn't been cleaning it out, but rather tending to it. He was carefully dusting the porcelain music box on Lillian's desk. "She always loved this," he said, his voice soft. "She'd play it when she was feeling sad. I never knew why she was sad. I thought it was just her temperament." He wound it up. A gentle, bittersweet melody filled the room. "It's Clair de Lune," Eleanor whispered. "Debussy, David's favorite piece to play." Arthur nodded, a sad smile on his face. Of course it was. He looked at her, at the bright, determined young woman who was the living synthesis of the two people his wife had loved most. "Eleanor, your final semester of nursing school is about to begin. Lillian's fund my own. You never have to work another day in your life. You could travel, you could do anything." "I know," Eleanor said, "but I still want to be a nurse. All my life, I've wanted to help people, to be there for them when they're vulnerable. I think I got that from her. From both of them." Arthur's eyes welled with tears. It was the answer he had been hoping for. She was not defined by the money. She was and always had been defined by her character. "Your mother would be so incredibly proud of you," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "I think she would be proud of you too," Eleanor replied, placing a hand on his arm. "You're finally letting people in." He looked around the room at the preserved memories of a life half-lived. "It's time," he said, more to himself than to her. "It's time to let the light in." The following week, movers arrived. They didn't pack Lillian's things away into a sterile storage unit. Instead, they carefully moved her favorite armchair to the main living room. Her books were interspersed with Arthur's on the shelves. Her music box was given a place of honor on the mantel. The West Wing was aired out, painted a warm, inviting color, and prepared not for a ghost, but for a new resident. Eleanor finally agreed to move in under one condition: that they build a rooftop garden. A place with dirt and flowers and life, the garden Lillian had always dreamed of. One evening, months after their first confrontation, Eleanor found Arthur standing by the grand window, looking out over the glittering lights of Central Park. This time, he wasn't inspecting for flaws. He was just watching the world live. He turned as she approached, a genuine warmth in his eyes. "You know," he said, "I have lived my entire life believing that my success was built on the principle of perfection. Uncompromising, unforgiving." He shook his head. "I was wrong. My life didn't truly begin until I accepted the most profound imperfection. A beautiful 30-year-old secret that changed everything." He looked at her, the daughter of his beloved wife, the woman who had saved him from his own sterile fortress. "Thank you, Eleanor. Thank you for not giving up on that $800. Eleanor smiled. "The principle of the thing," she said, echoing his own words back to him. Together, they stood in comfortable silence, no longer a billionaire and his maid, but two survivors of a shared history, building a new family on a foundation of forgiveness, truth, and a love that had refused to be forgotten. Arthur and Eleanor's story is a powerful reminder that the truths we hide and the secrets we keep have a way of surfacing, often in the most unexpected ways. It shows us that beneath the surface of titles and bank accounts, we are all connected by the universal threads of love loss and the search for belonging. A conflict that began over a speck of dust became a journey of healing that unearthed a 30-year-old secret and forged a new, unbreakable family bond. It teaches us that sometimes the most valuable things in life aren't about perfection, but about embracing the beautiful, messy, and imperfect story of who we are. What did you find most moving about this story? Do you believe some secrets are better left buried, or does the truth always deserve to be known? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. If this story touched your heart, please give this video a like and share it with someone who appreciates stories of incredible real-life twists. And don't forget to subscribe to our channel and hit the notification bell for more unforgettable stories that reveal the hidden depths of the human heart. Thank you for watching.